Welcome to our fourth session of our four-part series on exploring how religious trauma is impacted by COVID-19. I'm just so glad that you all are joining us tonight. And tonight we have a really interesting topic. We're going to explore the question of, will I ever feel safe again? And even asking that question right now, I'm noticing like that's a really big question, and it feels significant. It implies a sense that I haven't felt safe before, and what will it take for me to feel safe again? So tonight, the four of us will be exploring this question and offering some kind of suggestions for things we can do to connect to our felt sense experience a bit more, to notice what it does feel like to feel safe. What are some exercises we can do to kind of enhance our sense of safety, as well as exploring, what is it? What does it mean to feel safe? And so as we get started, we'll introduce ourselves briefly and then kind of answer the question, what was our experience like inside of religion in terms of how safe or unsafe did we feel? And for most of us, it's a kind of a mixed bag. It's not, we didn't feel unsafe all the time, but we didn't feel safe all the time. And I think just exploring that, noticing the difference between safe and unsafe. And so I guess I'll get started answering that question, and we'll throw it to the rest of the panel. So my name is Brian Peck, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Boise, Idaho. My experience of safe or unsafe in religion, I think underneath almost my entire experience was this low-level sense of unsafe, and at times that would become like kind of paralyzing the sense of fear. And so for me, that felt like tension. It felt like almost kind of waiting for the next shoe to drop. I was very concerned about being, doing the right things, not sinning, pleasing God. And it felt like I was being judged all the time. And so it was almost like anything that I would do in the world, there was this kind of sense or this feeling of, am I okay? Am I pleasing to God, or have I done something wrong? And so I never really felt just completely at ease. And it's taken me a long time to come to a place now where I feel more at ease, where I can take that deep breath and feel like I am okay just being me. And so yeah, that was my experience inside of a very kind of rigid fundamentalist Christian upbringing, just feeling not good enough, feeling judged, feeling unsafe. And that showed up in my body in lots of different ways, anxiety and so forth. So Kayla, I'm just really curious what your experience was in terms of safety inside of religion.
Yeah. So my name is Kayla Felton. I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker, and I'm a therapist here in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. And I think that for me, it was definitely a mixed bag of my sense of safety in childhood, because I do feel like I felt very loved, and I really valued the community that I had when I grew up, also in a fundamentalist Christian context. And so I think that I didn't feel that was an unsafe space for me. However, in reflection now as an adult, I can see where I also was just really, anxiety was also like a big part of my childhood. I wasn't conscious of it, so I wouldn't have used that word. But I think that I was really anxious about losing that, because I knew that was always a possibility if I were to do something outside of the community's, calling and direction. And so I think there was a sense of safety while I was in, and when I knew that I was loved and accepted by the community, but there was also a lingering anxiety of, what if I do something either on accident or on purpose that were to be outside of the community's approval? And then would I be able to make it outside of those relationships?
Awesome. Yeah. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Laura Anderson. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Nashville, Tennessee. And as I've been reflecting on this question, like Kayla was saying, I realize now that I probably didn't feel as safe as I thought I did. Safety for me, I think in the context of religion, came in following rules, aligning with the right people that could speak into my life, looking to others, to external sources to be able to tell me what to do or how to live, especially as it pertained to like what a godly woman looked like. And so I did feel safe if I was working within the context of what they had prescribed my life should look like. But also, I remember a very, very pervasive sense of anxiety. I don't even know if I would say it's a low level anxiety. I feel like it was at least a mid to high level anxiety all the time. Just in some ways, absolutely terrified of like, if I did the wrong thing, like Kayla said, if I made a mistake, whether it was intentional or not, if I sinned, I was very, very worried about what would happen. And I didn't even realize how anxious I was until I actually did come out of religion. And for me, my anxiety disappeared almost immediately. And that actually was really weird for me. I thought there was something wrong because I wasn't feeling anxious anymore. I could finally label it as anxiety. But I realized that was kind of this pervasive feeling really of unsafety because I was constantly unsure of kind of really where I stood. And as I was thinking about it too, the other thing that I think helped me feel safe was a pretty pervasive sense of guilt. I had this idea that if you were feeling guilty and convicted, it meant that God was like really like pruning you and looking at you and wanting to make, help you become a better, more godly person. And so if I didn't have something wrong that I needed to be fixing and something that I was convicted about, that actually felt really unsafe because I felt like maybe God's favor wasn't on me or, that I just wasn't doing the right thing. So I think guilt and anxiety were the way that I experienced safety and unsafety within the context of religion. And then moving out of that, I can see now that I don't know that I actually had a lot of safety as I would define it today, which I know we'll get into, but that's kind of been my experience.
Hi, everybody. I am Kendra Slider, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here in St. Paul, Minnesota. And similar to the three of you, when I was really active and identified in my faith of origin, I would have probably said that I felt very, very safe. But yeah, looking back, it's really, I realized that safety for myself was built almost entirely on external factors, external standards and examples, and it really was about being in. So you felt safe by being a part of the group and by maintaining the expectations of the group. But what that actually looked like for me was just a tremendous amount of anxiety and discomfort with myself and discomfort on a day-to-day basis. So just kind of living with chronic stress. But it was, I internalized it as that experience was actually a form of safety. So, yeah.
What I've learned is that if our safety is external to us, if someone else has to approve of us in order for us to feel safe, then that feels really great when they are saying, "Hey, well done, you're doing a great job. You get to exist. You get to be part of this community." But then it also feels incredibly risky because as soon as they say, "Well, you've disappointed us," or "You haven't done what you're supposed to be doing," then it feels like that safety is just kind of taken from me. And so, I think I want us to maybe dive in a bit deeper in terms of like what does it feel like to feel safe? And maybe distinguishing between these external factors versus this internal sense of safety. I know my own journey was one where I no longer had the external factors of safety because I was no longer part of the community, and it took me a long time to kind of really notice like when I was feeling safe and when I wasn't feeling safe, and what was my body feeling in those different moments. And so I'm just going to kind of throw that out there to the panel. What do you think about this question of like what is safe? How would you describe that. Yeah.
Because I think initially when I got out of religion, I talked about anxiety. I thought safe was like just the opposite, that I just didn't feel anxious. And I think there is something to be said for that. But anxiety isn't always the worst thing in the world either. It can let us know that something's not right, that we need to explore more. So I don't tend to subscribe to that as much anymore. It's like safety is the absence of, anxiety or the absence of guilt or whatnot. I look at it more as an embodied sense or internal sense of safety, which I think, I know I throw that word around a lot, and I know it's very hard to define. In fact, I wrote a post about it the other day. What is internal safety? And there's a lot of analogies that I actually came up with because it's hard to put a lot of words around it. Words that come to mind for me are like stable and calm. Like there's an internal sense of stability, or maybe groundedness. I sometimes imagine that there's like a pole like going through me that feels really strong and stable. I can still sway, but I don't feel like I'm off kilter. And so when I ask my clients though, what does it feel like to feel safe? When they say, yes, I feel safe. Sometimes it is, I can feel that I'm sitting on a couch that feels really sturdy and my body is relaxing into it. Or it feels like this person that I really love is giving me a hug, and I really needed that, and something in my body opens up and is able to receive that, and that is what my safety feels like. Or I know like when I see my dog, greeting me as I get home, there's this feeling of safety. She's so excited, and there's just this kind of overwhelming love and peace that kind of floods my body. And go, oh, that feels really safe. So to wrap that up for me, at least, I go, I don't know that words always do justice, but kind of this analogy of like, when I do this thing, it feels this way. And that to me is safety.
As we go through life, our body is always kind of assessing our environment for cues of safety and connection, as well as cues of threat. And so when our dog greets us when we come home, there's so many cues of safety and connection and love, and our body just senses and knows that. And it's hard, like you said, it's hard to put words to that, to describe that sensation. But I think most of us have a sense of like what that feels like. And the reason I said most of us is because I work with clients who have experienced, early childhood trauma, and their nervous system never developed a sense of safety. And so when we assess for safety and what that feels like, it's almost like, I don't know. And so we have to kind of build that from the ground up. And so I think when I think about it through this lens of these various physiological states, when we're in fight or flight, we can't connect. We can't feel like at ease. There's, we have to, our attention's focused on the threat or the exit, escaping. And so we wouldn't expect to feel safe in that physiology. If we're in this kind of please or appease, or this kind of freeze collapse state, that's also very disconnected. And I think honestly, so much of what I mistook for safe inside of religion was in that kind of more freeze collapse response. If I do what's required, then I get to survive, and that feels very kind of passive and powerless. But it also it kind of reminded me of what I thought safe was. What I've learned now is that sometimes safe comes from being very assertive and aggressive and powerful. And if I can defend and protect myself, then it's almost like this earned sense of safety. I've done what was required to be safe. And then that's that kind of sense of, after, you've, just exerted a lot of energy, or you've cried really hard, this sense of coming back into my body, feeling like I can be safe and okay here. And I love I'm not sure, I think Laura, you're mentioning the being hugged as an image of just kind of melting into that, kind of sinking into that feeling. And so thinking about safe, or that kind of faux sense of safety, or the artificial sense of safety, I'm curious what else you all have to add to that to kind of help us clarify a bit more what we're talking about when we're talking about safe.
a couple of words that come to my mind when I think of my sense of safety is groundedness, like Laura was saying. And then also there's an element of predictability. And so I think that brings us to like the question of the night, which is how do you achieve that sense of safety, that sense of groundedness in the face of incredible uncertainty? And yeah, so I think there is a piece to that about like, is there parts of my day that are predictable? And I think like you said, Brian, walking into your home, for me, I do have a lot of sensational, sensations of safety, sensations of groundedness, because I've curated my home. I know kind of what to expect when I walk into that space, and the energy I've created and curated. Things look a certain way, they smell a certain way, they feel a certain way, because that's a space where I do have more of a sense of control over my surroundings. And yeah, that sense of groundedness that like I'm home, I'm in my space, I get to be me here.
That's really important, because you were mentioning this, Brian. You said, some of us haven't ever felt that sense of safety. And I tend to think of religious trauma as complex trauma, developmental trauma, for most of us who grew up never really knowing a time or any length of time that we didn't have these indoctrinations and this dynamic in our home. I remember my therapist saying to me pretty early on into working with her, she, throughout the term of CPTSD, and I was, a little resistant to that. And she said, I think what's really hard for you is you never had it before. You never had like a time that you can go back to where you remember feeling safe, and then you didn't feel safe. And now we can move back into safety. So I think when we talk about what is safe, that oftentimes can be a foreign concept for people coming out of a religious context, because they've been in it and never been able to experience that. So this really is brand new. We had to find safety in those external things, the rules. We had anxiety or guilt, felt safe because that was all that we knew. And so we really are starting at square one to go, I might only be able to do little tiny things to create this, but that is good. Like we need to start somewhere, because most of us never had that opportunity to actually learn it as a child.
For myself, safety, like I mentioned earlier, was entirely external. And so my process of kind of undoing a false sense of safety that I experienced in the church when I was a part of it, and really embodying true safety for myself has been figuring out, knowing myself, like what that has truly felt safe is like, who is Kendra? What does she like? What does she not like? And, that can be as simple as like, I enjoy this color, or I really like wearing sweaters or things like that. But kind of moving away from this external false sense of safety where everyone else is telling me, yes, you're in or you're out, you're safe or you're not. It's been about really figuring out who I am, and that feeling like a sense of control and certainty and predictability by saying like, this is who I am, this is where I start and where I end.
To feel safe again requires us to feel. And I think when we talked last week about, can I trust myself? And there's that sense of if I can't trust myself, if I don't recognize that I'm living in a body and I'm just living in my mind or in these beliefs or these ideas or the structure, then we don't really have the ability to access what it means to feel safe, because we're checking in and noticing, am I measuring up? Are other people saying that I'm safe? And there can be a sense of safety there, being accepted by others in the community, of course, that can feel like safety. But if that's contingent on doing what you're expected to do or what you're told to do, and it doesn't feel like I have a choice or an option there, then I think that more likely is this kind of faux sense of safety, which is more that please appease response. And so I think maybe we can explore that a bit, noticing what it feels like. And also, I guess I want to just put this out there. When we're talking about safe, I think it might be more helpful to talk about safer, because we were promised 100% certainty within a lot of our religious context, and that safety was supposed to be, absolute, and God keeps you safe. You can trust God. You can trust, the beliefs and the doctrines. And when that's gone, then it feels like I'm starting from scratch. I don't really have this internal sense of safety. And so, what does it feel like to feel safe? What are my personal preferences? What things do I need in my life? And I think, Kayla, as you were talking about incorporating ritual into your life, as a way of having some predictability, as well as giving your body these cues of safety. So you feel free to share personal examples of what it feels like to feel safe, or also just begin to describe, like, what are these physiological, experiences, or these felt sense experiences that tend to be connected to safe for you.
One element of being able to feel safer is trying to identify, like, how am I measuring my sense of safety? Is this a measure of someone else's emotionality, or is this a measure of my emotionality? And trying to differentiate to be able to weed out when it's like, actually, this isn't my anxiety. I'm holding on to someone else's anxiety. Like, I'm not irritated. This person's irritated that I didn't do what they wanted, right? So being able to differentiate how much of other people's sense of safety or sense of irritation or anxiety are we holding that doesn't even belong to us. And so for me, one way that I've been able to establish more predictability in my life and that revisit that sense of groundedness on a daily basis is reclaiming ritual. And ritual can look like anything, literally. I mean, it can be a mindfulness practice. It can be a yoga practice. I guess that's a mindfulness practice. It can be, making this really delicious meal for yourself, on a daily basis. So I think that ritual can be in a spiritual realm. It can just be in the self-care. Like, I'm going to take a shower and I'm going to be really mindful about the sensations that I feel in the water. And so, yeah, and I think just like seeing it as ritual, though, and as an opportunity on a daily basis to incorporate predictability and I guess tradition or habit, into your life, so that your nervous system does get exposed to a predictable context on a daily basis, even though we can't guarantee your entire day is going to be predictable. But you can reclaim ritual and insert some predictable parts of your day and make it a daily practice.
I think that's really good. One thing that came up is, we hear the term thrown around a lot of self-regulation, like learning how to regulate your own nervous system. That's been really important for me on my own journey. And I have some cool stories that maybe I'll share another time or later on or whatever. But another thing that's really important is co-regulation. In order to be able to work towards healing, but feeling safe. And I know as a therapist, for me, what that looks like is I try to hold that space for my clients. So I'm in charge of regulating myself so that can essentially transfer to my client. So an easy way to describe it is if I have a client come in that's super anxious and maybe they're talking really fast, I can feel their energy. They're just kind of like hustling, and maybe there's like a little feeling of desperation. They're starting to talk really big with their hands. They're leaning forward. They're very animated. Their voice is getting louder. They're maybe talking faster. If I, as the therapist, match that, they're going to go to a higher level, and that I'm going to match that too. And what it's going to do is it's going to increase that sense of anxiety. So like Kayla said, in that moment, I realized, oh, that's their anxiety. And I'm not going to shame or judge that, but I'm going to tap back into my system and go, I'm not anxious, but I can use what's going on in me to help them be able to come down to a different kind of level that feels a lot safer. So what that might look like in my office is that I'll like actually sit back in my chair. I might get really slow with the way that I talk, and I'll actually lower my voice. And what will happen then is usually the client will start to then match what I'm doing, and they start to notice like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit safer here. I'm feeling maybe a little bit more present in the room. And I might even, at that point, when I notice that their energy is a little bit lower, where they're feeling a little bit more regulated, I might kind of bring them back into the space and say, so what do you notice right now? I have this like fur rug couch cover thing that I have. And I go, could you just like put your hands on my couch and feel the fur? What does that feel like running through your fingers? Does it feel soft? Does it feel really weird? Anything's okay, but it's just to get them back into that room. And so there is something really important about being able to have relationships that you can help regulate one another, that I can be grounded and present and help bring you back into that space, or vice versa. And that feels really important to creating safety also.
Yeah, I really love what you're saying there in terms of noticing that as mammals we co-regulate each other. That's just part of our biology, and to recognize that allows us to make different choices potentially. When I'm with certain folks, it feels a bit less safe, and so how can I build some more kind of boundaries in those relationships or that context in order for my body to feel a bit safer? A question that comes up quite often when I'm working with folks who have exited a religious community and still want to maintain relationships with their family members or friends. And yet it feels unsafe because every time they have an interaction with them, they're being, shamed a bit. They're being encouraged to come back to church. There's this kind of pressure, and we can recognize that maybe the believing family member or friend has the best intentions. I want you to be safe and okay in the world. So I'm going to encourage you to do the things that I think will make you safe. And yet for the individual, that can feel very threatening and unsafe. I'm being forced to do something against my will is what it feels like. And so in order to maintain that relationship, sometimes feeling a bit safer is feeling stronger in saying, I can say no to you. I can push you away. I can say, no, we're not talking about that. I want to have a conversation with you. I want to have a relationship with you. It's not okay that we're talking about the Bible. I want to talk to you human to human, that I can say no to that. What I learned inside of religion was if I go along and I please and appease, then I get to survive and I get to feel this kind of artificial sense of safe. When I feel aggressive and powerful and strong and I can push someone away and say, no, we're not talking about that. That is not okay for me. Now, when I contemplate spending time with this person in the future, instead of having this kind of sense of, oh no, I'm going to be trapped, or they're going to try to shame me, or I'm not going to feel safe around them. Now my body recognizes that I can say no, and I can push you away. I can set my boundaries. I can do what I need to do. And I think that's where there's almost this earned sense of safety. My body doesn't feel safe because I have a history of a person pushing past those boundaries, or my body feeling trapped inside of those conversations. When my body has a sense of power and strength and I can say no, then all of a sudden that opens up the context where I can feel a bit safer. And so so often it feels like if we were to be very assertive and aggressive with a friend, we fear that we're going to upset them, or it's going to somehow damage that relationship. In reality, if I don't feel safe in that conversation, then I can't connect. My body isn't a kind of, looking for the exit, or like, when will this be over? Can I survive this? That's a very different experience than knowing that if the topic comes up, I can say, oh, no, we're not talking about that. Remember, that's my thing. We're not talking about that. Then I can begin to trust that. And I think that, again, coming back to that question of what does it feel like to feel safe? For me, I think often it feels like I'm strong, powerful, aggressive, assertive, can have boundaries. And I recognize as a white male, like I'm supposed to feel that way all the time, like I have access to that power and can do that and say that. And yet in my own experience, that's something that's taken me a long time to begin to trust that, to believe that I can set my own boundaries. And so I would just encourage folks, as they're thinking about how can I feel a bit safer? Maybe safer feels like pushing someone away or setting a boundary or saying what needs to be said, doing what needs to be done. And again, I wouldn't ask you to do that in a big way, especially at first, because it could be very overwhelming for your nervous system. But when I work with clients, sometimes we'll talk about just a subtle, just kind of put your hand out a little bit, let your body know that I'm pushing you away. Like, no, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Moving on, shifting, noticing that just that movement, that ability to have some power in that conversation can allow your body to feel a bit safer.
You're bringing up a point, Brian, that feels really deeply connected to safer and creating more safer energy and more felt safety. And for me, one of those the big piece of that has been around understanding that increasing safety for me has meant really allowing my boundaries to expand and change over time. And it's been interesting in the last few weeks how I have really had to remind myself that, when I'm getting those physiological sensations of anxiety or angst or anger or exhaustion, and listening to them and saying, oh man, like, have I really not held to the boundary that I need to feel safe in my body? And really allowing myself to say that boundaries can move and adapt, and it's okay for me to say, like, for this season, I need a bigger gap between you and I, because that is what feels safer for me right now. Like a way that's showing up for me recently is, I'm spending a lot of time on Zoom meetings and realizing that I get to this point and I have to say no. I have to say, like, for this season, I can't give extra in this way. That's just a small example to what we're talking about. But this idea that our boundaries are is a relationship with ourselves, and we can allow them to get bigger or more specific, or we can bring them back when it feels safer. But that is such a key component for us feeling that strong internal safety.
I love what you're mentioning there, that this feeling safer is a very dynamic process, and it's changing, adjusting moment to moment. What you're sharing in terms of noticing what do I need in this moment? Does this feel safe enough for me to continue, or do I need to adapt and adjust? Again, that kind of goes back to that in order to feel safer, we need to be able to feel, because without the ability to trust our body, to notice that my body's telling me this isn't okay for me, and what does that feel like? And so I think for me, there's this kind of like, this kind of in-breath, and I don't know how to get out of this. This doesn't feel okay for me. And implied in that is, like, I need to do something to push away. There's almost clues inside of the felt sense experience that can indicate what needs to happen next. And so, if there's this kind of response of I need to run, I need to escape to safety, then maybe there's a physical way of expressing that as well.
As both Brian and Kendra were talking, the idea that came to mind was a concept that we use in somatic experiencing called titration, because, we think about how we didn't have that sense of safety or boundaries or healthy aggression in religion. And I think our human tendency is to jump right in and all in and whatnot. And if we go, I'm going to go from no boundaries to all boundaried, we might not know what that actually, kind of feels like. It might actually feel scarier. We're saying yes all the time to no all the time. And how do we navigate some of those sorts of things? So there's this concept in somatic experiencing called titration. It's actually I believe it's a chemistry term. And it's this idea that if we have a flask of chemicals and then another beaker of chemicals, what we don't do is pour the entire beaker into the flask and just see what happens. That could lead to a huge explosion, one that could be very damaging or difficult to control. And so what we do in chemistry is we take just the tiniest little drop from that beaker and put it into that flask, and we watch and we wait to see what the response is. And when we know it's safe, then we put another little drop in. And it's when we're working with trauma, that's oftentimes a very safe way to go about it. So when we're setting boundaries, when we're achieving internal safety, when we're actually like dipping into our bodies and feeling, I get a lot of comments on my Instagram of like, being in my body feels incredibly gross and disgusting, and that's the last place that I would want to be. And my therapist tells me, well, just be mindful and do this meditation, and and everything's going to be fine. And well, why would we want to do that if we're not feeling safe in our body, if it feels like a very uncomfortable place to be? And so instead of just jumping in, what would it look like to dip into our body for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and we go, okay, I'm there. I didn't die. I can come back out. It's this difference between something that feels uncomfortable versus intolerable. We don't want to go to intolerable. That overwhelms our systems. That can be what re-traumatizes us. But that discomfort, that's where growth happens. Because when we know that I've dipped into my body and I've been able to survive for 2 or 3 seconds, the next time I might be able to survive for 4 or 5 seconds. And we build it that way so that we can actually develop, for lack of a better term, like muscle memory, where we're getting into it. We're not just lifting the 100-pound dumbbell for the first time that we've ever gone to the gym. We're doing the 5-pound, right? So I think that's important. And I know we're going to maybe move into a couple exercises that just start to kind of just right on the surface there of how do we kind of dip into a couple of these sorts of things, and being able to recognize like, oh yeah, I can hang there for 1 second, but 3 seconds, that feels really intolerable. Okay, that's great. That was 1 second longer than it's ever been before. To celebrate that, but then to also be able to notice, like that's where my limit is, and that's okay. And that can be a safe progression into some of these skills that we're talking about and creating a sense of internal safety.
Within trauma, there's often a lot of shame around feeling powerless, right? And so it may feel like I need to kind of like burst out of this sense of powerlessness into this place of having a lot of boundaries and feeling really powerful and strong. And if we do that in a way that doesn't respect our limits, that maybe we've never done this before, and it can feel incredibly unsafe, and that can, put us back into a freeze collapse response because this newfound sense of power it feels unsafe to us. And I just want to add one more another concept that I find really helpful to go along with titration. And then let's as a group, let's explore like what are some practices that we can begin to incorporate to kind of strengthen and build this sense of safety. So the concept of titration, just doing a little bit, noticing, kind of expanding that window of tolerance, but not going too far, just kind of opening up a bit more, noticing, being with the discomfort, pushing a bit further, then coming back to a place of feeling safe again, or feeling like I can manage that again is super helpful. Another one is pendulating. And so kind of this, if you think of, moving from one side to the other as a pendulum might swing, there's this ability that we have as humans to think of or experience a very difficult, challenging experience for our nervous system. That might feel overwhelming. We might feel powerless. We might feel unsafe. And we can notice that, sense that, feel that, and then we can just set it aside for a moment and say, let's imagine a time when I felt very strong and powerful. It may be completely unrelated. And so inside of this interpersonal conflict, I feel completely trapped and unsafe, and I can't really trust myself, it feels like, in that moment. So I feel that, experience that, then just kind of set it aside for a moment and say, what was a time where I felt very safe and strong and powerful? And for me, an example is, running on a trail, the sense of connecting to my strength and power, the sense of openness, expansiveness, and I notice I'm breathing more easily when my body begins to kind of connect to that sense of like, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm strong, I can do what I need to do to be okay. And so then feeling that for a moment, and then saying, okay, and then back to that kind of interpersonal conflict. Noticing that feels intense and heavy. And again, there's a titration piece to that as well. We're just a little bit at a time, but we're moving in and out. And I think connecting to a sense of safer or stronger is a way of doing that. And so yeah, let's just offer briefly a few kind of exercises, examples, things that folks can do to kind of both notice their body and their kind of physiological response to their experience of safe or unsafe, as well as to kind of expand the sense of safety.
Yeah, so I did already kind of go a little bit into like reclaiming ritual or creating more routine, just to add to the predictability of everyday life, where we actually do have control over curating elements of our environment, our home, our routine. And for me, that for me is intrinsically linked to mindfulness. However, I do understand that term can be a little bit intimidating or even triggering for some folks who really are not trying to like sit with what exists in their body, which may be a lot of anxiety, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. So I totally understand why just that concept of mindfulness in general is often associated with a state of meditation, right? And so I just want to kind of talk about mindfulness beyond meditation and beyond kind of trying to clear your mind. Sometimes mindfulness can also be creating ritual and routine and actually giving your mind something to focus on and to do. That then at the end of it, you feel like I was productive. I achieved something. I went through and did this goal or this routine.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about mindfulness in that way. For me, mindfulness is a very dynamic process. And I think noticing, mindful walking or noticing various sound sensations in my environment are ways of kind of this more active mindfulness that feels less risky to me than just sitting with maybe what shows up when my mind is quiet. And so I think from a trauma-informed perspective, mindfulness can be quite triggering and difficult for folks. But to direct that in a way with ritual or with various practices that feel more kind of embodied, super, super great.
I think a couple things come to mind for me in response to that question. When we don't grow up in environments where we're really encouraged to use a lot of emotional or feeling language, just the idea of naming kind of what we're feeling can feel scary and at times not super safe. Or I have a lot of clients that describe feeling like they don't know what a certain emotion feels like in their body. So one of the things that came to mind for me is trying to ask yourself kind of what you're feeling or what emotion you might be experiencing in this moment. And if it's challenging to come up with that, really doing a simple scan of your body and asking, where are there sensations in my body right now? Are there sensations in my heart or sensations in my stomach? And can I give it a name? Can I describe it? And that feeling like a little bit more empowering and increasing more of that internal knowledge of self and internal safety. And another one that comes to mind for me, as far as something I use for myself to build safety when I'm particularly triggered or feeling anxious, is I try to engage as many of my 5 senses as possible. So there's this simple little exercise that I do called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And it goes through all 5 of the senses. And what you're trying to do is just re-engage those various parts of our physical body, because we know that when we get triggered or in a heightened state of just anxiety or a big feeling, we tend to disconnect from our bodies. So that's one of the greatest things that we can do to kind of increase that sense of safety.
Something I was thinking about as I was like going back in my memory, like what were some of the first things that I did to start kind of increasing my sense of safety? And part of that, like we've talked about, is being able to find ways to use our voice. So I did it with my dog at first. So my dog loves to be on me or touching me all the time, and I love her. but I cannot handle that. And so, but she's this sweet little thing that you can't say no to, right? And so I actually started I started initially literally with just moving her off my lap and putting her by me, which somehow felt really mean to me, but I knew I didn't want her on me. And she would kind of give me this look like, what are you doing? But I knew that I needed to be able to have space to kind of sit with, like, I just kind of like disrupted this little dog's desire, and it cannot be okay. Like she always comes back. She always loves me. Like, she's amazing. Can I tell her no, she can't sit on me? Can I tell her she has to sit by me or whatever? And it's funny, sometimes she will try to make me mad and she'll go sit at the other end of the couch. And then I have to sit with like, oh, she's exerting her boundary too, which is fine. But I think even when we can look for like little ways like that, where we can state what it is that I want or that I need in that moment, and in a way that feels relatively non-threatening. So to have my dog not sit on me feels relatively non-threatening, and to notice what that might feel like in my body. An intervention that I stole from Brian is, when the stores are back open and Costco or Sam's Club has all their free samples on Saturdays, and to walk around the store and actually be able to look at the people handing out the free samples and say no if you don't want them, which somehow feels really weird, but also there's no consequence to it. They're not going to chase you through the store trying to give you this food. They're just, going to go on to the next person, but it can be a really great way to be really embodied and to go, oh, what did that feel like to say no to this thing? And can I go to the next place and practice again, until we can get used to both what it feels like to use our voice and then getting to feel comfortable in our bodies, that I can hear my voice do that. And may never feel entirely comfortable. We may never love saying no. That's not the point. It's that we have the ability to do it in a way that feels effective and safe for us. So I think those are a couple interventions that I usually kind of point to, as it comes to starting to find safety.
There's so much safety. There's so much potential for safety inside of a no. And in noticing when I need to say no, again, connecting to our body, as Kendra was saying, noticing those sensations. Just by noticing our five senses and connecting with them, we begin to have more awareness of how my body's feeling in any particular moment. And then we can begin to notice, like, this just doesn't feel quite okay for me. And in practicing something as simple, well, I say simple, for me it's significant, as saying no to someone who's offering me something, right? Or trying, maybe going through the checkout and a person's trying to upsell you on something. And you go, no, that's not for me. And being kind of conditioned to comply or do what's expected, that no may feel very kind of uncomfortable at first, but to really develop that is super important. It feels like we're just barely scratching the surface of this topic, and there's so many other practices that are really helpful. And so the four of us have been talking about some options for, expanding this conversation a bit more. Maybe offering opportunities to do some smaller groups, some workshops, and various support groups around some of these topics. And so we want to kind of get a sense of what would be helpful for you. And so we'll be offering some opportunities for you to kind of take a poll or respond to some questions around, like, what would be helpful to learn more about. I know these 4 weeks have been really well received, and we've had a lot of fun. And I've learned so much. We've all learned so much together through this process. And we want to create other contexts where we can continue to grow together, and maybe in a bit more kind of personal, connected way that isn't just public on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram, wherever you're seeing this.